mean, look at the Israeli Supreme Court. It was built by Rothschild,
Right.
which is fraught with Illuminati symbolism and satanic
Right.
symbolism right there in the state of Israel.
Yeah, and if you walk through the Supreme Court of Israel, you actually walk or trample on the cross of Christ. That's part of the whole manifesto that they've developed.
Hey friends, Sean from SGT Report here. Thanks so much for being here with us. As we're about to celebrate the birth of Jesus Christ, I think this conversation with my friend and author James PERLOFF is very timely. It's about miracles, and I hope it warms your heart, because right now, many of us, all of us in fact, could use a miracle. Guys, if the rising cost of food, housing, and gas wasn't enough, now your dollar won't go far enough to pay your utility bills. Energy bills are expected to surge an average of 20% by next month and will jump 30% in 2023 and 2024. It's UN Agenda 2030. You know it and I know it. But that's why I recommend this amazing power-saving device. This device provides your home with a smooth, stable electrical current that helps to dramatically lower energy bills. It's been featured in Fox News, Forbes, Popular Electronics, Discover, and Wired. StopWatt lowers energy bills by stabilizing power, reducing dirty electricity, and eliminating harmful spikes. You'll also get a $100 utility rebate certificate if you get yours now. Try, inspect, and judge it with your own eyes and hands risk-free for 60 days. Plus, if you act now, you can get up to an additional 50% off. Just go to the link below or visit SavePowerBills.com. That's SavePowerBills.com. Hey friends, welcome back. Thanks so much for tuning in. It's Sean from SGTReport.tv and SGTReport.com and the Phaser here. Friends, the war against God, Jesus, the Bible, and Christianity is only intensifying as the rulers of the darkness of this world reveal their true intent. As I mentioned in a previous interview, UK government prosecutors argue parts of the Bible are no longer appropriate in modern society. It's the slippery slope into the abyss, isn't it? Here's another article from Breitbart. California releases thousands of convicted pedophiles within a year of their conviction. That's right. California has released thousands of convicted pedophiles after spending only a few months in prison. Such pedophiles have been convicted of a range of horrific acts, including raping kids under the age of 14, according to the study investigation conducted by the UK Daily Mail, who, by the way, loves to cover up for pedophiles like Jimmy Savile in the UK. So we have a big problem here, friends, and what we need are miracles. I want to welcome James PERLOFF back to the show. He's got an easy read in this new book. It's 100 pages long. It's called Missing Saints, Missing Miracles. James, welcome back.
Thank you, Sean, so much for having me back. Appreciate it. You got one of the best shows, if not the best show on alt media.
Well, thank you, sir. Thanks for coming back. And, our interview, God is Real, is one for the ages, because I think we established in that interview, which was my most watched interview before YouTube terminated my channel in that interview, we established that God very much is real. And friends, James PERLOFF has exposed the satanic deep state with books such as The Shadows of Power, Truth is a Lonely Warrior, 13 Pieces of the Jigsaw, and COVID-19 and the Agenda to Come, which is key to this conversation, the agendas to come. Friends, as you know, the COVID-19 pandemic and associated bioweapon masquerading as a vaccine was a pilot program to see just how far the satanic controllers of this world could introduce tracking and tracing technology globally, and they've only just begun. Listen to this clip from our friend Max Egan's latest.
Australian cities are becoming digital surveillance precincts, with so-called smart city programs being rolled out across the country. Invasive technology such as facial recognition cameras, licence plate readers, smart lights, smart poles, smart cars, smart neighbourhoods, smart homes and smart appliances, all connected to wireless networks and communicating with each other. So what's wrong with that? Technology is good, isn't it? All this is for your safety, security and convenience, isn't it? Well, let me tell you, your streets are spying on you. Your mobile phone is spying on you, your cities are spying on you, and the infrastructure for future lockdowns is being put into place right now. Don't be fooled. You're being set up to be tracked through your movements and through the future of your digital wallets. By handing over your data, you're handing over the ability to monitor your behaviour, which will soon be turned into a social credit score. And once the central bank digital currencies are in place, you won't get to spend your money without approval. Digital ID will soon become a reality in Australia. Many other countries are already rolling these systems out, countries like Canada, Scotland and many others. Eventually, you won't be able to access any government or public services, and you won't be able to travel across borders or access healthcare or the internet without a digital ID. Think you won't comply? I think you will. The last 2 years were the dress rehearsal and we fell for it hook, line and sinker. Australians are sleepwalking into this technocratic future, and while we're sitting around scratching our chins trying to work out whether this is really happening, Australia is drifting towards a dystopian digital future.
All right, I'm going to come back to James, then I have one more clip to play. James, when you and I did that interview, God is Real, the elite don't want you to know God is real. What was that, 2017, 2018? It was pre-pandemic. 16, okay. It was pre-pandemic. It was pre-bioweapon masquerading as a vaccine. And now we can see it also clearly, just 5 short years later, 6 years later. This is the beast system. And by the way, Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, well, he just praised China as the model. That's what's rolling out in Australia, and it's coming to Canada. And you know what? The Democrats want it to come here too. James Perloff, what do you make of what you just heard?
Well, this is something we've talked about for a long time. We've known for decades that they were planning a world government. We didn't know that they were going to use a medical pretext as they did. Although we had, the warnings from Ebola and swine flu and other predictors that suggested that they might use such a system. But we're definitely headed into a dystopian future. The speaker there was quite correct. China is being used as a model. In China, even the beggars don't take cash. You got to swipe their card. It's all digital. And once we go all digital, the government will have control over every transaction we make, and they'll have the ability to shut off our access to the internet, medical care, and other services. So this is a worldwide system of control. The speaker was absolutely spot on.
All right. Well, I have one more clip to play, and it's from somebody, I don't know the gentleman's name. It's from the account James Melville over on Twitter. The person speaking, I believe, is from China, and he knows very well how incredibly evil that system of control in China is. Let me play this clip, and then we'll get going on your book, because what we very much need is a miracle.
If you go to China, they're piloting it a few years ago in Shenzhen. So I lived overseas. If you go to Shenzhen, back in 2017, they already had facial recognition cameras there. So if you jaywalked in Shenzhen, they would immediately detect that and send you a notification, and they would deduct money from your what they call WeChat account. They use two main apps, WeChat and Alipay. So you can actually deduct your money directly from your account. This is 4 years ago, so this is not like some sort of conspiracy theory. It's not something that's going to happen 10 years into the future. This happened pre-corona in China. And so this system in China that exists is extremely advanced. They can detect if it's a man or a woman. They can guess your age. They can detect what kind of car model it is, who the manufacturer is. This is a sort of technology that we see in all these dystopian sort of films and whatever, and people keep putting it off and thinking that this is something that's going to happen later in my kids' lifetime or my grandkids. It's already here. And if this gets implemented anywhere, especially in a Western nation, it's not going away. Israel is already talking about the 4th shot. Then they're going to be going to herpes, and they're going to ask if you're gay. They're going to be asking if you ate 3 pizzas this week because it's unhealthy. If you buy certain books from certain countries, your country doesn't like you. You'll lose points in the social credit score system. So this is already the reality of the world in certain places, and we need to be aware of that if we don't want that or if we do.
Friends, none of us want that. No right-thinking person wants that. But the controllers that own everything, well, they want to own us too. They want us to be their chattel. They want us all chipped, tracked, and traced. Well, at least those of us who survive the Depop program. So it's clear we need more than protests because they steal our elections. We need prosecutions for treason, which may require a miracle. We need miracles. Let me read the back of James's new book here. Missing Saints, Missing Miracles. The Synaxarion. The lives of the saints of the Orthodox Church is drawn from hundreds of manuscripts from countries around the world from many centuries. After reading its 4,000 pages, James Perloff explores the question, what did Jesus mean by, quote, he that believeth on me, the works that I do, shall he do also, and greater works than these shall he do, end quote. Are miracles possible at a time when America and the West so greatly need them? Well, the answer is, of course, yes. James, I'm going to turn it over to you. Where would you like to begin? Tell us, how do we get these miracles, and who are the miracle performers? Who can help us out of this jam we're in?
Okay. First, I should mention why I decided to write this book. As you know, and you mentioned some of the books I've written. I've been a geopolitical writer, and actually, Sean, I don't know if you know how far back I go in this. It's actually 44 years. In 1978, I was passing out copies of Gary Allen's book, None Dare Call It Conspiracy, to coworkers.
Okay.
And in 1985, I started writing for the New American Magazine, which is an official publication of the John Birch Society. And in 1988, I wrote my first book on the New World Order, which was The Shadows of Power. And again, I've written several since then. But what was troubling me currently was that I saw we were fighting a losing battle. Now, I know we've had some victories. I know that the New World Order has had some setbacks. For example, they were trying back in the 90s to establish a North American Union, but thanks to people like Ron Paul, they never got away with it. And more recently, the World Health Organization had this worldwide pandemic treaty, which was defeated. It was voted down. But nevertheless, as I look at the world around me, the world powers, the deep state is more entrenched than ever. The control of governments and media is more consolidated than ever. And I'm very encouraged by the worldwide protests against Klaus Schwab, the World Economic Forum. But I have to say that because of the current level of surveillance, you were talking, so one of your speakers, or maybe perhaps both of them were speaking about facial recognition. It's advanced to the degree that a worldwide rebellion is getting less and less likely to be successful. And I felt that because this evil system is satanic, perhaps what we need is appeal for divine help, for a miracle at this point. So for the first time in my life, I wrote a spiritual book. Again, it's called Missing Saints, Missing Miracles, and it's based on a lot of missing data that we have in the West about the early Christian church.
Well, so much of our history is hidden, so I'm eager for the audience to hear more about this. I was reading through the book last night, but let me share one possible miracle that is in the works right now. The Supreme Court of the United States is about to hear a case, if they choose to hear it, and so far, it's passed all obstacles. So now all the Supreme Court needs to do is agree to hear it, and they're going to meet privately to decide whether or not to do that. It is Brunson versus Adams, and friends, this is the case being brought to the Supreme Court that 388 respondents in our government should be charged with treason for abdicating their responsibilities in the 2020 stolen election. Very, very important case. Let me just read a little bit from this statement of the case. This action is against 388 federal officers in their official capacities, which include Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Speaker of the House Pelosi, former VP Pence. All the respondents have taken the required oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And as such, they are liable for consequences when they violate the oath of office. Friends, this is very real. Now, maybe one of the miracles that will occur is the Supreme Court will hear the case and then do the right thing. We shall see. But anyway, I wanted to share that glimmer of hope with the audience, James, before we continue.
Sure.
So where do we go from here, James? Tell us about your book.
Okay. So the first thing I need to explain is that this book is written from the perspective of Orthodox Christianity. I became Orthodox in 2017. But as I explained in the beginning of the book, I just called a message to my Catholic, Protestant, evangelical friends. I'm not trying to stir up any kind of old denominational rivalries. My background is diverse. I grew up in an agnostic home. We didn't go to church except on the rarest occasions for social ulterior motives. We never prayed at home. And when I was 20, I was a complete atheist. Then from 72 to 82, I was in a New Age cult, which was completely hostile to Christianity. They made fun of it all the time. And finally, in 83, I came to Christ. And I spent more than 30 years in conservative evangelical churches. And so let me just mention a little bit about why I came to Orthodoxy, because this book is written from the perspective of that. It's based on the Synaxarion, which is the lives of the saints of the Orthodox Church. basically, it's interesting. If you look at the history of Christianity for the first 1,000 years until 1054, when Rome and the Vatican split with Constantinople in the East, Eastern Orthodoxy, there was basically one church. There were a couple of schisms, and then, a few times that there were heresies, which would be resolved by what they called ecumenical councils, 7 of which were convened during the first millennium. But basically, it's one church. And I just wanted to mention something. If you read Eusebius of Caesarea, who lived from 260 AD to 340 AD, he was the major early historian of the Christian church. And he refers to a man called Hegesippus. And Hegesippus was a Christian. He traveled from city to city, from Corinth to Rome, and he went to all the Christian bishops and churches, and he found, this is in the 2nd century AD, mind you, the doctrine was the same everywhere. The apostles of Christ knew what they were doing when they planted the churches. It was all uniform, and there was basically just one Christian church for the first 1,000 years. We don't realize this today. But okay, so the church split in 1054, and I'm going to tie in how I came to Orthodoxy, but it basically has to do with the history of the church. So after almost 500 years, Martin Luther came around, and he had some legitimate grievances against the Catholic Church. But remember, after the 1054 split, the only exposure we had in the West to Christianity was the Vatican. So Martin Luther split off, but however good his reasons may have been, the overall impact in the long run was to split Christianity into hundreds of pieces. I mean, Henry VIII started the Anglican Church, the Church of England, simply because the Church of Rome, the Pope, wouldn't give him a divorce. And hundreds of denominations began developing. And it got very confusing here in the East, in the West, excuse me. I just want to pick it up from something you were talking about earlier. I want to talk about how Christianity really got hammered here in America, started in the 19th century. It was really beginning with Darwin, which, as you mentioned, the most watched interview we ever did in an SGT report was our God is Real interview. I want to give you a quote from Charles Darwin, which is very significant. It's from 1873. Okay, Darwin himself said, quote, Lyell, he's talking about Charles Lyell, his evolutionary friend, is most firmly convinced he has shaken the faith in the deluge, meaning the biblical flood, okay, far more efficiently by never having said a word against the Bible than had he acted otherwise. I've lately read Morley's Life of Voltaire. He insists strongly that direct attacks on Christianity, even when written with the wonderful force and vigor of Voltaire, produced little permanent effect. Real good only seems to follow the slow and silent side attacks. End quotes. This is Charles Darwin, 1873. I want to make it clear, Charles Darwin was not interested in advancing science. He was interested in attacking the Bible. And he knew that in the Victorian era, you couldn't directly attack Christianity, it would offend too many people. But many people were impressed by science, which was making great progress at that time. So he introduced Darwinism as a science. We go into this in our God is Real interview, which you can find on your channel on BitChute or my homepage on PROPHETIC.net. Darwin knew he couldn't attack Christianity directly. So what did he do? He introduced what he called a scientific theory, which would convince people that life came about without a creator. And this is the first step towards taking down Christianity. Just as an example, we talk about this in our interview. I'll just give this one example. Darwin said that life began by chemicals randomly coming together and forming the first cell. Well, first of all, science is based on observation. Has anybody observed chemicals randomly coming together and forming a cell? No. Secondly, cells are much more complex than Darwin thought. He thought cells were just carbon and a few other chemicals, but actually he didn't know about DNA. He didn't know about the genetic code. And Sir Francis Crick, who won the Nobel Prize for co-discovering DNA, said that the chance of getting one protein by chance, which was Darwin's theorem, a cell has thousands of proteins, I should mention. He said the chances are 1 in 10 to the power of 260, which any mathematician will confirm that's impossible. And the last thing I'll say about this is that Darwin never explained this. for evolution to happen, this first cell of Darwin's, which came about by chance, in the span of one lifetime, it would have had to completely develop and perfect the process of cellular reproduction, without which there never would have been a second cell. Now, nobody in public, they're still starting public schools, but nobody questions it. Nobody asks the logical questions. But this became the new paradigm. And this opened the door where you could now attack Christianity. And so I want to quickly go into that because this leads into how I became Orthodox. Okay.
Yeah.
In
Can
America,
I say one thing?
Yeah. Oh, sure. Go right ahead, please. I don't want to speak for too long.
Sure. Well, let me just jump in and say and support you on one thing here. So Richard Dawkins in that Ben Stein film from, I think, around 2008 called Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed. At the end of that film, the avowed atheist Richard Dawkins is cornered. He finds himself really trapped by his own logic because he's not able to define how the first spark of life occurred on this planet. And when pushed by Ben Stein in the documentary, Dawkins ultimately relents and says, well, perhaps life was seeded here by an alien species.
Aliens, right. So how did life start? By the aliens, you know?
That's right. So Dawkins could never account for life being created by God, you know, a loving creator, but he is willing to say, well, perhaps it's some alien species. So both are obviously a leap of faith. I always find that quite entertaining. I would remind people that your book, Tornado in a Junkyard, really destroys Darwinism and the theory of evolution. And the theory of evolution, as you just noted, is designed, and I would say much like NASA was created and designed, to separate us from a belief in God. So we look to space, we look to the heavens, we find out, according to these people, that we are the random result of a big bang. God does not exist. The Bible is fake news, according to Yuval Noah Harari and the World Economic Forum's Klaus Schwab. So that's the controllers of this world. They're not hiding it anymore. So maybe they were hiding it in 1873 with Darwin. Maybe they've been hiding their true intent for a very long time, but they're not hiding it anymore, James. They're in the wide open. They want to they want to chip us. They think we're chattel. They think we're useless eaters. They hate God, and that is pretty much the sum total of their belief system.
And as well as no free will, according to Harari.
That's right.
That doesn't exist any longer. But just to take it from Darwin, once he established that is the paradigm that life began without a creator, the Rockefellers started funding what they call the modernist movement. And they started funding seminaries like Union Theological in New York and Rochester Seminary. And what these seminaries would start to teach was that the Bible is not authoritative. We don't know who really wrote the books. There were never any miracles. And sometimes we would even say that there was no such thing as the resurrection or even the existence of Jesus Christ. Now, I just want to give you one quick example of how the Rockefellers tie into this. So in 1922, Harry Emerson Fosdick, the pastor of First Presbyterian in New York, a graduate of the Rockefellers Union Theological Seminary, gave a sermon. And in the sermon, he said that the Bible wasn't real, the miracles weren't real, Jesus didn't die in atonement for our sins. And he said anybody who disagreed with this was intolerant. Well, this sparked an outcry, and he was kicked out of the First Presbyterian Church of New York. This 1922. Now, Sean, I want you to take a wild guess. Who do you think then immediately hired him to be the pastor of his church?
David Rockefeller.
John D. Rockefeller hired him to be the pastor of his church, Riverside Church in New York, which he built at a cost of $4 million, which was a lot of money back in those days. And John D. Rockefeller also paid for the printing of 130,000 copies of this sermon to be distributed to Protestant ministers. Now, I should also mention that at that time, the president of the Rockefeller Foundation was Raymond Fosdick, who was a brother of Harry Emerson Fosdick, who gave this sermon. So this is just an example of how the Rockefellers were totally involved in the modernist movement. Now, I have a chapter on this in my book, Truth is the Only Warrior, but you can also read it for free on my website, jamesperloff.net. Just look for the war on Christianity. So that was one side. Now, the other side were the fundamentalists. Now, the fundamentalists were people I liked. They said, we believe the Bible. We're against modernism. We believe in Jesus Christ. We believe that the Bible is the Word of God. So I was in evangelical churches for about 30 years. But it took me a while to figure out was that while the Rockefellers were funding the modernist movement, the Rothschilds were funding the fundamentalist movement. And they did this. I want you to watch this sequence of events. This all took place in 1917. In 1917, they published the Schofield Reference Bible by Oxford University, which claimed that the Jews must return to Israel, and it's every Christian's duty to support this. Okay. Now, 1917 was also the year of the Balfour Declaration. The Balfour Declaration was when the British government promised in a letter to Lord Rothschild that they would support the Zionist goal of establishing a Jewish homeland in Palestine. Now, 1917 was also the year the United States declared war in World War I, which we had no business being involved with. This was a quid pro quo. The Zionists had promised the British government that America would enter the war as their ally, provided that they issued the Balfour Declaration, in which the Schofield Reference Bible would support. 1917, you'll also remember, was also the year of the Bolshevik Revolution, the first communist revolution. And now I want you to watch the events very carefully. The Bolsheviks waited until the American declaration of war, because had America declared war earlier in 1917, this would have bolstered the Tsar's position in Russia. He would not have had to abdicate. And so all these events are taking place in sequence in 1917, the Balfour Declaration, the issuance of the Schofield Reference Bible, the American Declaration of War, and finally the Bolshevik Revolution, what they call the October-November Revolution, all taking place at once. Now, so I got involved in the Zionist fundamentalist movement, not realizing what I was in for. So let me give you some examples, okay? I started to hear some really strange stuff in my fundamentalist church, evangelical church. They said that this era of grace under Jesus Christ is only temporary. We're going to go back to an era, a Jewish era, where we're going to do Jewish animal sacrifices in the temple and a rebuilt temple.
Wait. You're breaking news here. This is really important stuff, because they're pushing for that again, obviously, as you know. The Schofield Reference Bible, I had no idea, was essentially sponsored by, created by, or pitched by the Rothschilds. That is very interesting.
I have a whole chapter on that in my book, 13 Pieces of the Jigsaw. And again, you can read it for free on my my website. It's called The War on Christianity, Part 2.
Well, the reason, let me just say, though, the reason I bring that up as being so important is because I say often that the current state of Israel, the rebirth, the formation of the state of Israel where it is right now, is due to the Balfour Declaration. And it all ties back to the Rothschilds. So when I see people in the comments constantly saying, name the Jew, name the Jew, name the Jew, the root of all evil is Jews, I do like to remind people that the Jewish religion, or I would say the mantle of Jewry, was hijacked by the Rothschilds so they can hide behind it. And therefore they used that story to essentially create the state of Israel where it is, which they also, in my view, control. I mean, look at the Israeli Supreme Court. It was built by Rothschild. The cost is unimaginably high, so much so that they never revealed what they spent to build it. But Rothschild paid for the Supreme Court building, which is fraught with Illuminati symbolism and satanic symbolism right there in the state of Israel, as you know, James.
Yeah, and if you walk through the Supreme Court of Israel, you actually walk or trample on the cross of Christ. That's part of the whole manifesto that they've developed. Well, to get back to my church, they said that when Christ returns, he's going to rule from the rebuilt temple of Jerusalem, a Jewish temple, for 1,000 years. And I said, wait a minute, how can we be going back to animal sacrifices? The book of Hebrews says Jesus paid once for all. We're clearly done with that. And as far as Jesus ruling for 1,000 years from a Jewish temple, which is based solely on one passage of scripture in Revelation, this didn't make any sense. If you go back to the Bible, many times people tried to make Jesus a earthly king. He always refused. He said, "My kingdom is not of this world." And actually, if you take specifically what Jesus said about his return, he said, this is from Matthew 24. He said, "So if anyone tells you there he is out in the desert, do not go out, or there he is in the inner rooms, do not believe it." but my church was teaching that we should believe it, that Jesus is in the inner rooms. Now, this comes from the Apostle Paul, speaking of the end times in 2 Thessalonians 2. He tells you who's really going to be in that temple. He said, talking about the end times, he said, quote, "Don't let anyone deceive you in any way, for that day will not come until the rebellion occurs and the man of lawlessness," meaning the Antichrist, "is revealed, the man doomed to destruction. He will oppose and exalt himself over everything that is called God or is worshipped, so that he sets himself up in God's temple, proclaiming himself to be God," end quote. Now that's the Apostle Paul saying right there, it's the Antichrist who will rule from a Jewish temple, not Christ himself. So my church was setting us up to actually worship the Antichrist as Christ. Of course, he'll claim himself to be Christ. That's part of the meaning of the phrase Antichrist. But if you think about it, if Jesus is going to be in the temple for 1,000 years here on earth, then what about those of us who are in heaven? Are we going to be separated from Christ for 1,000 years? It doesn't make any sense.
Can I ask you, I just want your opinion on Rothschild, because I know that they're one of maybe 13 bloodlines of the Illuminati, but I just want people to see this. The invitation to one of their balls was all written in reverse because they love to invert everything. So right is wrong, good is evil, or evil is good, and they hate Jesus Christ. By the way, this chateau that you see here lit up in red, well, that's where Roman Polanski, a pedophile who anally raped a girl, which Hollywood celebrates, that's where Polanski filmed his movie about Satan, The Ninth Gate. Incidentally, Eyes Wide Shut, directed by Stanley Kubrick, well, he also shot the memorable scene of the masked Illuminati where Tom Cruise gets caught and almost loses his life. That was also shot at a Rothschild mansion. Now, I think in the case of Polanski, he wanted to shoot it in a Rothschild chateau because Polanski's an evil guy. I think Kubrick wanted to shoot it in a Rothschild mansion, at least that scene, because he was telling us who these people are, what they do in secret, and what they believe. So I just wanted to interject there and share that with the audience. If you have any comments on the Synagogue of Satan and Rothschild's role in it, please enlighten us.
Sure. That's excellent. I mean, Hollywood has dropped so many clues to us over the years, as you know, what they call predictive programming. It's been with 9/11 and so many other events. Well, what got me writing this book was this. I should probably just quickly mention what a saint is considered in the Orthodox Church. You know, in Christianity, we consider every believer a saint, and the Orthodox Church agrees with that. But when they talk about a saint with a capital S, they're talking about somebody who's been commemorated because of extraordinary service to others, virtues, and in some cases martyrdom, in some cases the working of miracles. Now, the reason I got onto this whole project was that Saint Paisios. Now, he was a saint of the 20th century, and what I loved about this man was, he lived in a humble hut on a mountain, and thousands of people came from the world over to seek his spiritual counsel. And I want to give you something that he said that, and this man died in 1994, mind you. He said something very prophetic. He said, "A vaccine has been developed to combat a new disease, which will be obligatory, and those taking it will be marked. Later, anyone who is not marked with the number 666 will not be able to buy or sell or get a loan or get a job or and so forth. My thinking tells me this is a system through which the Antichrist is chosen to take over the whole world," end quote. Now, remember that I don't know the exact date of the quote, but the man passed away in 1994. This is a man who gets tremendous respect. And one of the things he recommended in his counsels was to read from what they call the Lives of the Saints. Now, I've heard of the Lives of the Saints, but I never actually got into it, but I decided to. I got a volume, this is called the Synaxarion, the Lives of the Saints, the Orthodox Church. And I just thought, this will be some spiritual help to me. But then I started reading it, and I started learning things about Christianity that I never knew, and miracles that I never knew. And by the time I was on the second or third volume, first I was thinking this would make a good blog post. And I said, this needs to be a book. I was learning. So there's actually three things I want to do before we finish off today, Sean. I want to talk about missing history we're missing about Christianity in the West. Number two, I want to talk about miracles. And number three, I want to point out that every miracle worker described in the Synaxarion, which is 4,000 pages long, and I read all of it before I wrote my own little book. Every miracle worker in the history of the Christian church all had one thing in common. So let's start with the missing history. But let me throw it back to you before I do that.
Sure, and then I'll shut up and let you get us through the next 20, 25 minutes here. Before we run out of time, I just want to say one more quick thing here. There was a video that I produced when I still had my YouTube channel, and it was titled this: Amschel Rothschild said Rothschilds have met with Satan.
I believe it.
Obviously, that video is no longer available because my channel was terminated, but let me just read this first paragraph. Now, this still appears on my site, thephaser.com. The video's just not there. I think if you go to Alt-Censored and search SGT report in the title of the video, you might be able to find it. But let me just read this first paragraph. Amschel Mayor James Rothschild was born in 1955 and died in 1996, explained in an interview with a magazine called Progress for All that he had personally met with the devil, or Lucifer, in Colorado, and that the eye on the American $1 bill is the eye of Lucifer, and that the seal was taken to America by Benjamin Franklin and Alexander Hamilton before 1776. Now, Amschel, who was the acting successor of Evelyn de Rothschild, was regarded as not having the killer instinct required by a Rothschild, and he paid the ultimate price with his own life. Now, my understanding, just from trying to recollect that video, James, is he paid the ultimate price because he said what he said about the Rothschilds communing with Satan, with Lucifer. So I don't know. I don't know for sure if that's true, but I would take the man's word for it. And he died, I think, shortly after saying so.
I take his word for that, and I did see an interview. I don't know if it's still available, with a very high-ranking Freemason who said that Satan actually spent much of his time on the Rothschild estate, Jacob Rothschild's estate in England. And this guy was very high-ranking Freemason. I actually do believe it. I can't, it's not one of those things that I could prove in a court of law, but I do believe that the spiritual warfare we see, there's an intimate link between the demonic and human beings who have given themselves over to Satan.
Yeah, and by the way, and I'll shut up, I really will here in 1 second, but I just want to say, this is Satan's world, okay? It's a fallen world. So it's Lucifer's world. He promised the whole world to Jesus if Jesus would just bend the knee, bow down, kiss the hand of Satan. And Jesus said, this is not my kingdom. So it is a fallen world, and the demonic plan that's unrolling here that we can all now see, I mean, from the bioweapon masquerading as a vaccine to what is in this bioweapon that they don't reveal, but independent researchers are now uncovering. It's very, very frightening stuff. I mean, synthetic nano bioworms, essentially, parasites, very, very disturbing stuff. So whether or not what we just discussed coming from Amschel Mayor James Rothschild is real, it doesn't really matter. The demonic plan that we see unrolling here is very brilliant in its scope, and it requires a conspiracy involving thousands of people at the highest levels to roll out this bioweapon, to kill people, to depopulate, to track and trace. So whether or not you, dear listener, believe in God, the God of the Bible, or the Bible at all, or Jesus Christ, I want you to know that they, the enemies of humanity, they do believe in the very dark power of Satan and Lucifer, the controller of this world. So if they bowed down, unlike Jesus, and they kissed the hand of Lucifer, perhaps they are being granted access to this demonic, brilliant plan to enslave and ultimately destroy humanity. That's all I wanted to say. Now I'll shut up.
Well, okay, how much time do we actually have left, Sean?
How much time do you need?
Well, it's 20 minutes would be nice, but...
Yeah, 20. Let's go 15, 20. Okay. Go for it.
All right. So the first thing I want to talk about is missing Christian history. So again, I was reading the Synaxarion, and I started to learn all kinds of things I never knew. Now, when I was in the evangelical churches, we all knew Christ died on the cross, but nobody ever asked, including myself, by the way, the logical question: what happened to that cross? Okay, you never know. But when you read the Synaxarion, you find out that first of all, the cross of Christ was thrown into a hole by Jews to prevent Christians venerated it, and they also threw in the 2 thieves' crosses. Now, in 70 AD, as Christ prophesied, Jerusalem was utterly destroyed, the inhabitants wiped out. But then in the 2nd century, the Roman Emperor Hadrian rebuilt Jerusalem. And then, as most of us know, in the 4th century, the Roman Empire was Christianized by Constantine, the first Christian emperor. And in 326 AD, Constantine ordered that the cross be found. So Golgotha, where the cross had been thrown away, was excavated by Constantine. And after a long time, they found the 3 crosses. But the question was, which one was the cross of Christ? Well, there were 2 eminent clues. On 2 of the crosses, the nails were black and rusted, but on one, they were shining and gleaming. Then the Patriarch of Jerusalem had a dying woman brought to this site, and they had her touch the 2 crosses that were black and rusted, and nothing happened. But when she touched the cross with the gleaming nails on it, she was instantly healed. And at that point, they knew they had the true cross of Christ. Now, the cross of Christ was on display in Jerusalem until 614 AD. By the way, this is one of the reasons why Christianity was so powerful and spreading in the first millennium, was that there were so many relics of Christianity, of the Bible. Well, in 614 AD, the Persians invaded Jerusalem and captured it, but by God's grace, in 627 AD, the Christian Byzantine army defeated the Persians and recovered the cross, and remained in Jerusalem until 1187 AD, when the Latin Crusaders brought it into battle against Saladin. Saladin, the Sultan, Muslim Sultan, defeated them and refused to give the cross back. And now we still do have a few pieces of the cross in various monasteries and churches, but that's kind of the history of the cross. I never wondered about it before.
No,
I
that's
never
interesting. I didn't either. That's super,
Yeah.
super interesting because, of course, I'm a big fan of and have talked about and done a video about in the past the Shroud of Turin, which
Right.
is itself a miracle because that image of whoever that was, and I believe it to be the body of Jesus Christ, it's a negative.
Right.
It's a negative image, which is impossible. It's a photographic negative, which is infused in the Shroud of Turin. And only when using modern day photography did they realize that it was a negative. And when you view it as such, you can see very perfectly what appears to be a man in his early 30s wearing a crown of thorns with all of the wounds that you would expect to be on the body of the Lord Jesus Christ. It's a miracle.
It's real. Yeah, it's real for sure. It's interesting. I wasn't going to plan to mention this, but there was another similar event to the Shroud of Turin where the king of Edessa, not to be confused with modern Odessa, it was an ancient country in Turkey, we now call Turkey. He had leprosy, and he asked Christ through a messenger if he could heal him. And Christ said, "I have to finish my mission in Jerusalem." But he washed his face with a cloth on which his face was indelibly imprinted, and he sent it back with a messenger to the king of Edessa, who, when he venerated it, was almost completely healed of leprosy. And then the Christian apostle Thaddeus came and baptized him, and he was completely healed of leprosy. Now, this is interesting. Edessa became the first Christian nation in history. I never knew that. The people who venerated that cloth, which was placed on the city gate, and it was the first Christian nation in history. I never knew that. But there were many other things. The cross that Constantine, I'm not going to elaborate on this, it's going to take too long, we'll lose our time. The cross that Constantine saw on the cross was preceded by another Roman soldier. His name was Procopius of Caesarea, and he won a miraculous battle against the Arabs, which he attributed to Christ because he'd made a silversmith made an image of the cross, and he carried that cross into battle. Well, when the Emperor Diocletian heard they attributed this to Christ and not the Roman gods, he was executed, but not before many of his soldiers came to Christ through the miracles that accompanied his persecution. Now, other things, Lazarus was raised from the dead, but how many Christians know how many years Lazarus lived after who's raised by Christ. That you find that in the Synaxarion. What happened to Nicodemus, the man who came to Christ and was told you must be born again? You learn that his fate when you read the Synaxarion. Refer to the woman at the well, the Samaritan woman at the well, and the Synaxarion. You learn her name. It was Photine. You learn what her ultimate fate was. How about Zacchaeus, the little tax collector? I never knew he became the bishop of Caesarea. He did. Okay. You learn in the Synaxarion that the bodies of Timothy, Andrew, and Luke were brought to Constantinople to what they call the Church of the Holy Apostles. You learn that the 12 baskets that miraculously held the product of the fish and the loaves that Jesus made were kept by Christians for 3 centuries and finally brought to Constantinople for display. Constantinople was an amazing Christian city, just incredible. The Christian sites and relics you would see there, but of course today it's entirely Muslim, and it's actually illegal to be Christian in Turkey, in Istanbul today. But until 1453, when it was conquered by the Turks, just an amazing city. Well, that's some of the history which you'll learn from my book. But the second thing, I'll throw this back to you. But the second thing, and this is the most important thing, is the miracles.
Yeah, the miracles. And boy, could we use the miracles, modern day miracles. Guys, the book is Missing Saints, Missing Miracles. Do you have any evidence of miracles being done today? I mean, I could name a couple potential miracles that we've seen, but where are the big ones? Where are the miracles? How do we take our republic back from these demon creatures, James?
Okay. Well, here's what I wanted to mention. There's a very important quote from Jesus Christ. And this is from John 14. He said, "Believe me that I am in the Father and the Father in me, or else believe me for the very work's sake." Believe me for the very work's sake. He seems to be talking about miracles here. I don't think there's any other interpretation. And he continued in this quote, John 14. He said, "I say unto you, he that believeth on me, the works that I shall do, he shall do also, and greater works than these shall he do, because I go unto my Father." End quote. Now, when I was in evangelical churches, I was told this several times, there were no miracles after the book of Acts. Jesus was not talking about real miracles. He was just saying that, in the future, Christians will evangelize more people than he did. But when I read the Synaxarion, again, 4,000 pages long, when you take all 7 volumes, I started to read about miracles being done, post-biblical miracles. And I didn't even begin to take notes on these until I realized how many there were. And so let me just give you examples, okay? Healing the blind, healing lepers, these are things that Jesus did, right? Healing paralytics. And remember, Jesus healed a paralytic, was lowered through the roof. Casting out demons, raising the dead, multiplying small amounts of food to feed multitudes. This occurred several times during famines. Halting storms, walking on water. There were several saints that walked on water. And let me just explain something here. This was not to show off. That the cornerstone of a saint was humility. If anybody walked on water to try and show off, they would have plunged right into those waves. Okay, in addition to that, prophesying the future, knowing the thoughts of others, as Jesus did, enabling fishermen to make a miraculous catch of fish, changing water into wine, which was Jesus' first miracle, even the moving of a mountain. I have 2 examples of that. Now, after I started publishing my book, I was given an example by a book from a saint who was martyred in 2009 of another example of moving a mountain. I didn't include that, but every miracle Jesus did, perhaps short of resurrection, was done by post-biblical saints. And Jesus said they'll do miracles I didn't do, and this included halting the flames of a city fire, ending droughts, ending plagues. It was absolutely amazing. And I know what many evangelicals will say. They'll say, "Well, I don't believe that because it's not in the Bible." Martin Luther preached sola scriptura. Well, a couple of things about that. Number one, these miracles happened after the Bible, so how could they be in the Bible? Number two, when I was in evangelical churches, nobody actually practiced Bible-only sola scriptura. They would read C.S. Lewis. I was in a church where they instructed us all to read Rick Warren's The Purpose-Driven Life. They would read Bible commentaries, Bible study aids, devotionals, biographies of modern theologians like D.L. Moody. They would read Christian books on marriage. So if we're going to trust all these modern theologians, why should we cast out the early church records from, the first century, the second century, the third century, the fourth century? Now, I want to point out here that the church does not equate this with inspired scripture. Remember, it was the ancient church that actually established the canon of scriptures, and they don't say that these ancient church records are equal to that. In fact, if you read the Synaxarion, they have thousands of footnotes, and if there's ever a discrepancy between two different accounts, they're very careful to note that. And if there's any significant doubt, they throw that out. But we should not be canceling Christian history because of this rule of sola scriptura, Bible only. To me, it's the equivalent of what we're doing today in America, where we wipe out history. We call it cancel culture, where we take down the statue of Robert E. Lee because we don't like it. So I'm not saying that all of these accounts could not include an embellishment, but we should not be getting rid of them. What I'm saying is that what Jesus said, he really meant that people after him would be doing miracles just as he did, and even miracles that he did not do.
That's powerful. Let me do a screen share. I mentioned a few modern day miracles that I could cite. This is my favorite. I remember this. This was reported about on the news a few years back, and I remember hearing the first responders explain what happened in their own voices. So this isn't just an internet thing I just went and found. This is real. This really happened. A mysterious voice led rescuers to find a child who survived for 14 hours in a submerged car. Here's what happened. March 2015, Lynn Jennifer Grossbeck, 25 years old, lost control of her car and landed in the icy Spanish Fork River in Utah. 14 hours later, first responders found her 18-month-old daughter, Lily, in her car seat hanging upside down just above the frigid river water. Prior to finding Lily alive, both police officers and firefighters report that they heard an adult voice yelling, "Help me," from inside the car. They discovered that that voice could not have come from the young mother, who likely died from the impact 14 hours previously. The rescuers still can't explain that voice or how that girl survived hanging upside down for 14 hours in freezing temps without being dressed for the cold.
Tyler, when you arrived on scene, what did you do?
We heard something saying, help us inside. And so it was at that point that we, said we have to get in that car now. And we all, the four of us, were able to push the car on its side. And that's when I looked inside and was able to see the child infant strapped in the back seat.
So you actually heard a voice calling out, "Help me." Do you know who that was?
At first we didn't know if it was someone inside the car, if it was what that voice was. We assumed, or I assumed, that it was someone in the car saying, "Help me." That's why we responded saying, we're trying, we're going to get inside and help you, we're doing the best we can. And that was just extra motivation and to get inside the car and figure out who was in there. It wasn't until after we flipped it that we saw the mother, who we know now was deceased at the time, and the child was in the back seat. And so it wasn't until after the early process and we got together and we all heard the same, voice.
And Jared, you heard that voice as well?
Yes, I did. Like Officer Beddoes has said, more than one of us, of the four officers that were there, responded back saying, "We're here to help."
That's one of my favorite miracles. I believe that's an angelic interference. That's angelic intervention there, in my opinion. Perhaps it was the spirit of the mother crying out. Perhaps it was actual angels crying out. But to me, that's a modern day miracle, James.
Right. And in my book, I acknowledge that, when I was in evangelical churches, I heard people give testimonies as to miraculous healings in response to prayer. And I know that our Catholic friends would point out appearances of the Virgin Mary. So I'm not trying to say that miracles are exclusive to the Orthodox Church, but I did want to mention that these miracles that were done, this is where I'd kind of like to close off. All the miracle workers had one thing in common, and I found that fascinating. So I'd like to go into that before
Please.
we end.
Yeah, don't leave us with a cliffhanger. What did all of these miracle workers have in common?
What they all had in common was absolute rigorous obedience to Christ. Now, if you look at the miracle workers, Christ said that the path is narrow and few there are that find it. And number one, you might remember that in Luke 18, Jesus said to the rich young man, give away, you'll still lack one thing, give away your possessions to the poor and then follow me. Well, if you look at the miracle workers, they followed this to the letter. They would give away their possessions to the poor or to the church, and they would start on their spiritual journey. And their spiritual journey usually led them into isolation, to be away from the temptations of the world. And they would go to rooms in monasteries, or they would go out in the desert like John the Baptist had done, or they'd go to a mountain like Jesus had done. And Jesus said to when you pray and you fast, you should do in isolation, right? Not for the admiration of men. So, but what they were trying to do was to conquer the passions, to conquer what we call in Christianity the old man. And although the Synaxarion never uses the phrase the seven deadly sins, I would have to say that it basically corresponds to that. The seven deadly sins were pride, greed, anger, envy, lust, gluttony, and sloth. I have a long way to go on these, but these people would conquer self. In fact, let me just quote St. Peter the Egyptian, lived from the 4th to 5th centuries, said, "For as long as one is dominated by a passion, he cannot be called a servant of God, because he is a slave of the passion he serves. He therefore cannot teach others how to free themselves from it." Now, today we think in the West that all we've got to do is take a theology course and then become a teacher. But in the early days of Christianity, you needed to conquer yourself. You needed to conquer the passions before you became a teacher, before you became an abbot of a monastery. You first had to conquer yourself. This behavior was intrinsic to Christianity. Another thing about them, there are a couple of things I want to mention, is that they fasted, and they fasted strictly. Now, if you look at Jesus, he said an example. He went to the desert and he fasted for 40 days. These Christians, these early Christians, these saints who worked miracles, would truly fast. Some of them lived on bread and water alone, and not even every day. Sometimes it would be several days before they ate bread and water again. Others would eat dry vegetables that were near them, but they never were gluttonous. They never ate fancy meals. And another thing, you might remember that St. Paul said we should strive to pray continuously. And this they did. They would pray throughout the day or meditate on the scriptures. And by denying themselves, by truly carrying their cross, by giving away their possessions to the poor, which, by the way, we should not confuse with Klaus Schwab, you'll own nothing, be happy. That's communism. That's when the state seizes your possessions. This is quite different. This is voluntarily giving up your possessions. By giving up their possessions, by fasting, by conquering the old man, the self, and by communion with God through constant prayer, they started to acquire the Spirit of God. And when they did this, that's when they started to be able to do miracles. Now, the Synaxarion, for example, described St. Papias of Egypt, who lived in the 4th century. It said, observing strictly the commandments of our Lord Jesus Christ, we receive from God the ability to work the same miracles as we read of in the Holy Gospel. So the one thing that they all had in common, Sean, was they were all rigorously obedient to Christ. That's not how we tend to look at it in Western Christianity. We say, well, Jesus paid it all. I don't have to worry. That's not how these saints looked at it. The saints who worked miracles invariably spent their entire lives in strict, rigorous obedience to Christ. And that is truly what we need in order for miracles to happen to Christ. Now, not everybody can do that. And I acknowledge this in my book. I mean, what if you're a single mom who works 2 jobs and you've got an autistic child at home? You're supposed to, go out in the desert and conquer your passions? No. Christ said, to whom much is given, much is expected. And the corollary of that is, to whom little is given, little is expected. But to whatever degree we can here in America, we should be trying to work ourselves, to improve ourselves towards more prayer, more forgiveness, more giving if we can, to follow the narrow path that Christ prescribed, because that is precisely what all the miracle workers had, and there were hundreds of them listed in the Synaxarion. And what I've done, but I think the one thing that my little book, Missing Saints, does that is unique is I take each miracle and I list the saint who did it, when they did it, and where they did it, to the best of our knowledge. And I also, by the way, have 2 chapters whether or not these miracles are credible, because I know that many of our listeners and viewers will be saying, well, how do we know these aren't just made up stories or tricks by magicians, right? So we do address that in the book, but that's what I wanted to get across, was strict obedience to Christ, not just a casual, that's a casual believer. The casual believer would never do a miracle. It was those who strictly followed the commandments of Christ who did miracles.
Wow. Another important conversation with James Perloff. Be away from the temptations of this world. Conquer the passions, the 7 deadly sins. Follow the narrow path. Well, a miracle is what we will get, because in the end, truth wins, God wins. There's no way we're going to consent to this new world order, satanic world order. There's just no way. Most Americans are awake. So what's the enemy do? They steal our elections blatantly, right in our face. They know it. They brag about it, and we're expected to just accept it. I don't think that's going to work for very much longer. James Perloff, I really do appreciate you. Tell people how they can find your book, Missing Saints, Missing Miracles.
Well, it's available in paperback and Kindle on Amazon. That's the main place to get it right now. They censored my previous book on COVID, but I don't think they're going to censor this one. It's strictly spiritual, and they don't censor spiritual books. So I would look for it on Amazon. In the meantime, to find my other books, which talk about the history of the New World Order, get my website, jamesperloff.net. A lot of articles there you can read for free. And on social media, I'm on Twitter, where I am 98% shadow banned. So I have almost no outreach there. But I'm also on Gab, and I'm trying to develop a following on Gab where they don't censor you as on Twitter, despite what Elon Musk has proclaiming to do so far.
Guys, thanks so much for tuning in. I appreciate y'all so much. I want to let you know, too, I post this material ad-free at sgtreport.tv. For a very small monthly fee, if you sign up there, you can watch this content via your own television, lots of different ways, and it's ad-free. So again, thanks so much for your support at sgtreport.tv. If you want to become a subscribe star, that's also a great way to support the channel and our work. And for real news every single day, guys, visit us directly for free at sgtreport.com and thephaser.com. Those are antidotes to corporate propaganda and Mockingbird mainstream media lies. May God bless you and your family. Bye-bye.
A huge root cause for cancer is parasite infections. They are finding that in people's organs when they remove them for people who have cancer, and then the cancer ceases to exist.